So Marxists, they look at the world as international relations or politics as politics or relations between countries in the periphery and countries in the center of the capitalist economy, right? So they say that the international system, or the way they look at the international system, is that the system is structured in a way that capitalists and powerful countries, through colonialism, they exert power, and sometimes in a new form called neocolonialism. They control the world, they control institutions, and the rationale of international politics driven by the capitalist economy is an international system that diplomatically, economically, politically exploits countries that are poor, that are low-income countries, middle-income countries. And these countries are poor and are middle-income countries because precisely countries in the center of the economy, right? The center of the economy, according to Marxists, the way Marxists look at this, are countries that that control international aspect of international economy, right? Such as banking, technology, innovation, right? Information, culture, also control, according to Marxists, right? This cultural hegemony concept is put forth by Marxists, particularly Antonio Gramsci, right? The Italian Marxist revisioner. So this is the way in which Marxists look at the world, right? And sometimes we have that perception, or we have those ideas, but we don't know, we are not aware that theoretically, conceptually, that perception, that way to explain international politics is just the way how the classic Marxism have always explained the international relations. And there's something key about Marxism, and write this down. This is not here. Marxism considers that countries that are poor and countries that are, they're also called the semi-periphery. These are countries like, for example, Mexico, Chile, that they don't control the economy, but they are the economic center for a lot of countries, even for countries that are superpowers, right? That's why, for example, Donald Trump is actively pushing forward American corporations to come back into the United States, right? Mexico, Brazil, Argentina are highly industrialized countries, and these are countries that are considered to be in the semi-periphery, right in the middle, right? These are not countries in the core, these are not countries in the periphery. The periphery will be Central American countries, right? Low-income countries, right? Countries in the periphery. And going back to my original thought, Marxists consider that countries in the periphery within the capitalist system will never be able to transcend that position. I will never be able to achieve prosperity under the capitalist organization of the world economy. All right, is that clear? What do you think about that theory? Explains a lot or not? Marxism.
Hello?
What do you think the theory, Marxism, explains a lot or not?
I think so. I think it's pretty accurate, especially today.
In what way? Can you elaborate a little bit?
Just that, like how you were explaining with countries like Mexico and like nations being reliant on them, even though we don't see them as like a country that we rely on, and how the president's talking about bringing jobs back to the United States for those reasons. And like, I just found it interesting that we have to care about, or we have like smaller nations have to be cared about because of the impact that they have on a ton of other nations as their suppliers. And that Marxism theory just kind of fit into all of that, how you explained it, at least.
Do you ask me a question at the end? Did you ask a question or?
Oh no, I didn't ask a question.
Okay, sorry. It's a rhetorical argument. Okay, so again, for example, you have we'll discuss more about this in the next chapters. but you have this discussion going on in multilateralism, in the UN multilateralism since 1998, yeah, or so, when Kofi Annan, the then Secretary General, proposed a global offensive against poverty, right? The so-called Millennium Development Goals, right? And he proposed this agenda, and now the idea was that by 2015, a lot of the countries that had low human development will actually resolve a lot of their poverty issues and access of the population to basic needs. And countries establish agendas, government establish agendas, they coordinate it. I mean, talk about the 190 plus countries, right? With the UN agencies. And then in 2015, a lot of the countries did not achieve these goals. These are 8 goals, 18 objectives, right? The real ones. We'll discuss this more in other chapters. And then by 2015, a lot of things had improved, but a lot of things have remained to be resolved. So they started negotiating a new 2015-2030 agenda. So, for example, the new left-wing government in Spain, or the first left-wing government in Spain, they're now proposing to adapt the 2030 agenda. I mean, the objectives for the next for the next 10 years on poverty issues to incorporate those objectives and indicators and goals into the new public policy of these first left-wing government in Spain. In that struggle to define that agenda, you have countries that perceive themselves as financially weak and economically vulnerable, and they argued that they would not be able to achieve the human development goals because the international system and because the financial system and international banks and international organizations had objectives and protocols that did not cater to the countries that are still in the process of development, right? And this was the argument, and also countries that maybe they don't have big development issues, but countries that still have issues of debt, right? So Latin America, the African Union, Caribbean countries, in 2015, they pushed for that agenda together. Yes, let's pass a 2030 agenda, but an agenda that requires international institutions to adapt to the needs of, right, and obstacles and realities of the countries of that are low income, right? So that's a classic example, right? And even their foreign policy of these countries was based on the assumption that within the system, if the capitalist system don't accommodate our agendas and needs, then within the current capitalist system, we would not be able to achieve our goals, right? Is that clear? You understand that, right? So the Marxist analysis is very much present in a lot of the foreign policy of countries in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. And then you have Bernie Sanders, right? This idea of domestically, right? Bernie Sanders, this idea that without giving basic needs to the working class, low-income families, the economy won't be able to progress to achieve prosperity. That's a very Marxist explanation, right? And from an economics perspective, is a very heterodox understanding of economics, right? To say that the capitalist economy as it is, the trickle down doesn't work, so the governments and also internationally states have to look for ways to accommodate the most vulnerable. Do you have comments about that? Questions? Thoughts? Okay, so that's in terms of Marxist theory. I would like next class to give some room, some space to talk about the so-called, and write this down. We'll just briefly mention this and discuss some important points of there's so-called post-structural theories. Post-structural theories. They're also called reflectivist theories. Reflectivist theories. And within that group, you have world system analysis, you have critical theory, you have feminist theory, environmental theory, and so on, right? So because they are all related, it's easy for me to next class to just cover that real quick in 5-10 minutes and listen to your reactions, right? So let's keep that for next class to start with our subject of foreign policy, right? Do you see the PowerPoint or no?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah,
perfect.
I see it, yeah.
Perfect. So how do you think foreign policy works? I mean, when a country is devising, coming up with a policy on how to live with other countries, issues of terrorism, issues of environmental change, how do you think countries, what is your understanding of your take, right, of your observation on how this works? What has to happen in order for a government to define, right, a policy on how we will be dealing with, right, the nation will be dealing with international issues? What has been your observation?
Are you talking about for the United States or just in general?
Oh, if you have other cases, that's great. But I'm talking about the U.S.
Oh, I know foreign policy is done at the State Department.
Okay. The State Department, right? The experts, right? People, they hire diplomats who have to take an exam. Then you go through an interview. You can go and be deployed for, right, to work on economic relations or cultural relations. It's called public diplomacy or whatever, right? So, and yes, I mean, in all countries it works in that same way, right? The base where foreign policy and relations are centered, controlled, right? For a nation is in the foreign ministry, which that's the name in most of the countries, or in our State Department here in our country, right? What other actors intervene? We know, right? Foreign policy and diplomats. But what other actors intervene in the foreign policy making?
Business firms.
Business firms. Perfect. We had the case, you will see that case in the documentary American Diplomats, that the European Union, they were in these discussions on to approve the supranational constitution, and they came up with an idea of protecting local European producers of bikes, motorcycles, right? And they considered for a while banning the entrance of some materials coming from international producers, and banning some motorcycle mechanisms. And this was an idea that was designed by some European corporations to ban the entrance of Harley Davidson into the European market. Harley Davidson motorcycles. And the State Department, right, took the lead in resolving that issue. And if we look back, not only that case, but also in 20th century, US 20th century, also 19th century, late 19th century, the foreign policy of the United States was framed, directed by specific commercial, economic, and banking interests, right? And that is a very interesting moment in American history. The country was changing. The country was fully industrialized, late 19th century, economic crisis. And we have the Vanderbilt family, families connected to the banking industry, giving loans to countries that they knew won't be able to repay these loans because they have dictatorial governments, right? We can think about the case of Nicaragua, the Dominican Republic. And then also sugar corporations needed to extract more sugar for the American market and to make more money. And these commercial interests really framed or shaped how the U.S. dealt with Latin America, Central America, and the Caribbean in the late 19th century. So more corporations, right? Economic interests. What else? Okay, so let's continue with this. So let's go. We'll discuss this more in depth now. So foreign policy, right? That's the agency. That's the power of agency that states have to define not only how they act, but to define also, states also define what are priorities, agendas, and challenges and threats, right? So foreign policy is, to a large extent, a combination of analysis, definitions, ideological decisions, ideological considerations that allow a government and also those countries' institutions to define foreign policy. How foreign policy is how the state, the country, will project itself in the world, and how the country will deal with international issues abroad, right? Lawmakers, right? Elected officials. You have in the Senate and also in the House, foreign affairs committees. We saw more recently Marco Rubio, if you have seen the news, very much because he's a member of he's a Republican senator. He's a member of the Foreign Affairs Committee in the Senate, and he has been very active in dealing with the issue of Venezuela, right? Publicly, right? Talking about the Trump administration should undertake a more aggressive approach, et cetera, et cetera. Diplomats are trained to do that. You just need a master's to work as a diplomat. You have all the diplomats that are academics, but diplomats are the experts that deal with not only the execution of a foreign policy, right? How to conduct foreign policy according to protocols, but according to a sophisticated analysis of the country's situation in the world, right? And what is priority, what is not priority. So diplomats executes foreign policy. And then think tanks, you have many foreign policy think tanks. You have RAND, R-A-N-D. I believe there was a scholar that came to talk to our department that he works in RAND Corporation. R-A-N-D is a corporation, is a think tank that produces reports about U.S., American geopolitics and security, right? You have other think tanks that also have influence on American foreign policy, but that deal with other issues. For example, Intermom Oxfam is another think tank, international organization, also that generates knowledge and also tries to influence U.S. foreign policy in the world regarding issues of poverty and development, right? And then you have variables, other variables, right? These are kind of the actors, the people that execute foreign policy, that do analysis of foreign policy, lawmakers, diplomats, think tanks, that's their job. They get money, they get paid, they get grants to do that, they get a salary to do that. But then you have other kind of variables like political culture, policy decision, and internal actors in political culture. For example, a good example is what we have here, right in the U.S., our eternal conflict between expansionists and and the other right, the people who promote isolation. I'm forgetting the word, right? People that promote isolation and people that promote expansion of American interests around the world in any way, any means possible. So that's part of the political culture of the United States. That defines the U.S. political culture. You still have that. You have that discussion in this issue of pulling out the troops from Iraq, from Afghanistan. To what extent the U.S. should intervene in Libya or in other places. Those are discussions that are defined by the political culture of the place, right? For example, India is a economic power. But in India's political culture, you don't have those ideas or aspirations of becoming kind of right, becoming a dominant, right, political actor in the world, of shaping any kind of policy in the UN, or shaping any kind of influencing any kind of political relations in Asia, right? India is, for the most part, it is described in diplomatic studies kind of a white elephant, right? It has a very kind of a blurry, undefined international objectives, right? Beyond the BRICS initiative, right? That was an initiative to make Brazil, Russia, India, South Africa more autonomous in relation to the US politics and economics in the world. India doesn't, right? We will assume that India might be tempted to have a political culture of domination, but that's not the case, right? They have nuclear weapons, but so far for Pacific purposes. And then you wrote here the case of Chile. That's in how other factors, right, shape foreign policy. Chile is a country that, if you look at the map, is a very long country, right? It's to the eastern side of South America. Is cornered, right? It's facing the Pacific. It's not facing the Atlantic. And he's always looking at the other way, not looking towards Argentina, which is the neighbor. He's looking, right? It's a country with a Pacific orientation, right? Just as California, for example. And Chile is a country that have its political culture have grown throughout history since its independence, with this idea that Chile is alone, that Chile is alone. That Chile is facing the Pacific, not really facing South America, and that Chile needs to kind of save itself, right? And in part because the beginning of the South American independence process, right after the independence process, these countries fought with each other for border issues. Even today, Chile still has a border dispute with Peru that was more or less defined 2 years ago in the International Court of Justice, and also border issues and energy resources issue with Argentina. So Chile is a country that is unique in South America because they have been always prone to look at a more independent, autonomous foreign policy. And that's why, that's one of the reasons why Chile became the first country in South America to sign a free trade agreement with the US. And it has also been the only country in South America that have always proposed to include Mexico in all initiatives towards regional integration. Chile wants always Mexico to join in, even though Mexico is a North American country, it's not a South American country. And a lot of countries in South America, like Brazil, have never liked that idea. So Chile does that, behaving always like the I don't know, public enemy number one in South America, because they always very concerned about fulfilling and their political culture, and follow those perceptions made in history that Chile can only save itself because geographically it's isolated from the rest of South America, right? So that's another aspect shaping foreign policy, your geography, right? Your geography, where you are, what geopolitical forces crosses you. We have the case of also Caribbean countries that have always have this perception that they're weaker, that more vulnerable, that to some extent, I'm talking about English-speaking Caribbean and Spanish-speaking Caribbean, right? Cuba is a different case, but for the rest of the islands, Spanish and English-speaking and French-speaking and Dutch-speaking Caribbean islands, there's this perception within these societies, and again, this is political culture, right? That in some extent they need some kind of tutelage, they need some kind of patronage, they need some kind of close political connection with a powerful country, right? You have Jamaica is an independent country, Trinidad, Jamaica is an independent country, and other English-speaking Caribbean nations, but those that are independent are also part of the Commonwealth of Nations, right? And that's a way kind of to rebuild this kind of, right? It is indeed a post-colonial relationship. And then you have, we mentioned that already, foreign policy formulation. You have Congress, executive branches, right? White House, the three branches. The legislative branch, the executive branch, and then the judiciary branch, the Supreme Court. They interpret when they have to. They do interpretations of foreign policy. We have 10 minutes. I don't know. Let me. So I mentioned that NGOs, universities, think tanks, right? They also intervene in this foreign policy formulation. Congress has these mechanisms of the public hearings, right? They invite experts and right, and they get to take the contributions and perspectives from people that are experts on different international issues. That's the work for NGOs, university, think tanks. They will always cooperate with Congress and elected officials to define foreign policy. And then a classic case, I mean, the third bullet here, there was an arms sales done, approved by Congress. Congress resisted, but the Clinton administration pushed for that sale of F-16, 24 F-16 to Chile in 1997. Clinton considered this sale important because it will help Chile transition finally into that, from that dictatorial regime of the Pinochet years to real open democracy by forging a new relationship between American corporations, American military, and the Chilean military. And you remember the Chilean military, they have a close relationship with the CIA that raised a lot of animosity in the world, make a lot of people angry in the world because the system from the CIA allowed to the military coup against President Allende in 1972. So for Clinton, it was important to broker this agreement between the Lockheed Corporation. If you go to Washington, D.C., to the subway there, you see, right, the Lockheed Martin General Dynamics posters. And this is a corporation that produces military equipment and airplanes, and et cetera, military airplanes above all. And in this sale, the Republicans in Congress in 1990s were concerned that this will start a race, a military race in South America. Right? The sale was allowed, and that eventually happened. But again, we see a corporation taking advantage and also framing foreign policy regarding the transition process and the role of the U.S. in that transition in Chile. Right? Guys, we still have like how many minutes? Let me see.
7.
7 minutes. Yeah.
Okay. So what time is it?
8:05.
8:05, or
So-
at least east, or like what? I don't know. Yeah, never mind.
So you would like to I mean, are you tired? You would like to come back and do another half hour, or do you want to continue discussing this and also discuss chapter 5 next class? Because I believe if you can read chapter 4 next class, then we can have a more active conversation about this and then move quickly to discuss chapter 5. What do you think? Or we can just come back now and do a more half hour. What do you think?
Yeah.
Did you? Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, for me personally, I would like to read the chapter and like do it next week so I can participate better.
Okay.
That's myself. I don't know about you, Jeremiah. Or
Yeah, I was just gonna ask, like, are we supposed? So you want us to read chapter 4 and 5, or just chapter 4 to prepare for 5?
I mean, chapter 4 was we're discussing today, so you should read chapter 4. You haven't read that chapter 4 and 5, both chapters.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
I will
Yeah.
chapter 5. I will upload a PowerPoint for chapter 5, so you can just guide your reading, right? To know what is important, what is not important. That will help you kind of speed up the reading.
yeah, that would help. That would help.
Perfect. So I think if you read, we can just speed up the conversation next class, and then I will send you while you're working on chapter on this this foreign policy chapter, I will send you the homework, which is very simple. And again, you don't have a deadline. I will just post the homework later,